"Excuse me, I'm looking for an old man who used to sell bread near the bus station." He walked with a cane. Annie flinched. The broom slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a sharp sound. She looked up at the man in the doorway, eyes wide, lips parting as if the words had startled the air right out of her. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't know anyone was there." Daniel Harper didn't move. He had asked that question in his head for years, but saying it out loud made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said. "I'm just trying to find him." Annie swallowed. She bent down, picked up the broom, then held it against her body like something familiar she needed to steady herself. "The man with the cane?" she asked softly. "Yes," Daniel said. "He sold bread. Right outside the bus station." Her eyes dropped to the floor. "That was my grandpa." Daniel nodded once. "Is he here?" She shook her head. "No, sir. Grandpa passed away last year." The words came out carefully, the way adults teach children to say difficult things. Daniel felt them settle heavily between them. "I see," he said. He paused, then asked the question he hadn't planned to ask, the one that had slipped out before he could stop it. Was he kind to you?" Annie looked up, surprised. Then she nodded firmly. "Yes. Very kind." Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "That sounds like him." There was a moment of silence. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice lower now. "I owe him my life," he said. "He took me in when I had nothing. I've been looking for him to thank him, to repay him." Annie's grip on the broom loosened. She studied Daniel's face, her head tilting slightly, the way children do when they're matching a story to a person. "You're the man," she said. Daniel frowned. "What man?" "The one Grandpa talked about," she said. "The boy who came hungry." Daniel's throat tightened. "He talked about me?" She nodded. "Not all the time. Just sometimes. Usually when he thought I was asleep." Daniel looked away for a moment. When he looked back, his eyes were damp. "Did he say what happened to him?" he asked. "To the boy?" Annie shook her head. "He said the boy grew up," she said. "He said the boy went far away to build a life." Daniel gave a faint smile. He made it sound nicer than it was. Annie didn't smile back. "Grandpa said you were polite," she said. "Even when you were scared." Daniel felt the words land somewhere deep. "I was scared," he admitted, "but he didn't make me feel ashamed of it." Annie nodded, as if that confirmed something she already knew. She set the broom aside and folded her hands together. "You asked why I know it's you," she said suddenly. Daniel looked at her. "Yes," he said gently. "How did you know?" She took a breath, then began, carefully repeating words she had clearly heard many times before. Grandpa said, "One day, a man will come back looking older than he feels. He'll ask about bread before he asks about me." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "He said you'd stand like you weren't sure you were allowed to be here," Annie continued, "and that your voice would sound steady, but your hands wouldn't be." Daniel looked down. His fingers were trembling. "He said if that man ever came," Annie went on, "I should give him something, and tell him this." She hesitated, then spoke more quietly. "Tell him I never used his money, not a single dollar." Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" Annie nodded. "Mama found the envelope when Grandpa got sick. Grandpa told her to leave it where it was. He said it belonged to you." Daniel took a step closer without realizing it. "Did he say why?" She looked at him seriously. "He said a father doesn't take from his son," Annie said. The words hit Daniel with a force that made his knees weaken. He steadied himself, one hand pressing lightly against the wall. "I didn't know," Daniel whispered. I thought he needed it." Annie shook her head. "Grandpa said you needed it more. He said you were meant for bigger things, but he also said you'd come back. He always believed that." She reached into her backpack and pulled out an old envelope, its edges worn soft. Daniel recognized it instantly, his handwriting, his name, written carefully as if the paper itself mattered. Annie stepped forward and placed the envelope gently into his hand. "He told me not to throw it," she said. Not ever. He said when you held it, you'd understand. Daniel's fingers closed around the envelope. He didn't open it. He couldn't. Not yet. Thank you, he said, his voice unsteady. Annie nodded. You're welcome. Daniel looked at the child standing in front of him, holding the weight of a man's last promise with a steadiness far beyond her years, and in that moment, he understood something he had spent his whole life running from. He hadn't just come back too late. He had come back exactly when the truth could no longer be avoided. Daniel didn't open the envelope. He stood there with it resting in his palm, as if the paper itself were breathing. Annie watched him closely, her expression calm but attentive, the way children look at adults when they sense something important is happening and don't want to interrupt it. Would it be all right if I stayed for a bit? Daniel asked at last. Just to sit? Annie nodded. You can sit where Grandpa used to sit, she said, pointing toward a chair near the small kitchen table. He liked that one. Daniel lowered himself into the chair slowly. It creaked under his weight, but it held. Everything about the room felt like that old, worn, but still standing. He placed the envelope on the table in front of him, keeping one hand over it, as though afraid someone might take it away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Daniel said, I was younger than I should have been to be on my own. His voice was steady, but only because he forced it to be. I didn't know how to ask for help back then. Annie climbed onto the chair across from him, folding her legs beneath her. Grandpa said you didn't ask, she replied. He said you just stood there. Daniel let out a small, humorless breath. That sounds right. He looked at her. Really looked at her now. There was something in her eyes that reminded him of the old man. Not the color, but the steadiness. The quiet confidence that came from knowing who you were, even if the world didn't care to notice. He found me near the bus station, Daniel continued, his gaze drifting away. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I thought I could make it on my own. Turns out, pride doesn't keep you warm. Annie listened without interrupting, her chin resting on her hands. I remember the smell of bread first, Daniel said. Fresh, warm. I thought I was imagining it. He shook his head faintly. Then I saw him, standing there like he'd been there forever. Annie smiled. He liked to be early. He asked me if I was hungry, Daniel went on. Not if I had money. Not why I was there. Just if I was hungry. Daniel swallowed. No one had asked me that in a long time. Graps, if this moment touched something inside you, please take a second to like this video. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Your words matter more than you know. And if you believe quiet kindness still exists in this world, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story. Annie nodded, as if this confirmed everything she already knew. He brought me here, Daniel said. Gave me a place to sleep. Didn't ask how long I'd stay. His fingers tapped lightly against the envelope. I stayed longer than I planned. How long? Annie asked. Daniel thought about it. Long enough to remember what it felt like to wake up without fear. Annie looked down at the table. Mama says Grandpa did that for people, she said. He made places feel safe. Yes, Daniel said quietly. He did. The silence returned. But this time it felt different. Less heavy. More like respect. After a moment, Annie slid off her chair and walked toward the hallway. I'll get you some water, she said. Grandpa always offered water. Daniel started to protest, then stopped. Thank you, he said instead. While she was gone, Daniel finally picked up the envelope again. He turned it over once, twice. The paper was thin, soft at the edges, like it had been handled carefully for years. He remembered writing his name on it, sitting on the edge of the bed, hands shaking with fear and hope mixed together. He remembered sliding it under the pillow and leaving before he could change his mind. He hadn't imagined it would come back to him like this. Annie returned and placed a glass of water in front of him. Careful, she said. It's cold. Daniel smiled faintly. Thank you. She sat back down. Mama will be home soon, she added. She works late. Radiant. I won't be in the way, Daniel said quickly. I can go. You don't have to. Annie said. Grandpa didn't like people leaving when they were sad. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He sounds like he knew me better than I knew myself. Annie considered that. He said you were brave, she said. But that brave people get tired too. Daniel looked at her, surprised. Did he say that? She nodded. He said being strong all the time makes people lonely. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. I think he was right. He took a sip of water, then set the glass down carefully. His hand hovered over the envelope again. Annie, he said, did your grandpa ever talk about why he kept this? She shook her head. He just said it wasn't time yet. Daniel closed his eyes. He could almost hear the old man's voice, calm and patient. Not time yet. He had always known when to wait. I should have come sooner, Daniel said. The words came out rougher than he intended. I kept telling myself I would. After the first year, after the second, then life got loud. Annie tilted her head. Mama says grown-ups do that, she said. They make promises to the future. Daniel smiled sadly. Your mother sounds wise. She is, Annie said proudly. The room grew quiet again. Outside, the world continued on without them. Daniel felt the pull of the past and the weight of the present pressing in from both sides. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now, he admitted. He hadn't planned to say it out loud. But once it was there, he didn't take it back. I came here to repay a debt I didn't expect. He gestured weakly toward the envelope. Toward Annie. Toward everything. Annie thought for a moment. Grandpa said, when people don't know what to do, she said, they should start by staying. Daniel looked at her. Staying? She nodded. Just for a little while. Until it makes sense. Its knotting died. He felt something loosen inside him then. A knot he'd been carrying for years. I can do that, he said softly. I think I can. Annie smiled, small but certain. Good, she said. He'd like that. Daniel rested his hand over the envelope one last time. Whatever was inside could wait a little longer. For the first time in a very long time, he wasn't in a hurry to run from what he felt. He was finally where he was meant to be. Daniel stayed until the light outside the windows softened into evening. He hadn't planned to. In fact, part of him had expected to leave within minutes after the shock, after the envelope, after the polite goodbyes. That was how he had lived his life for years. Arrive, take in the facts, move on. But the chair beneath him felt steady. The room felt patient. And Annie, sitting across from him, seemed in no hurry at all. He finally broke the silence. Did your grandpa ever talk about the bus station after it closed? He asked. Annie shook her head. He said places don't disappear just because people stop using them, she replied. He said they stay where they are, waiting for someone to remember. Daniel nodded slowly. That sounded exactly like him. When I left, Daniel said, I thought I'd never come back here. I told myself that if I did, it would mean I failed. Annie frowned. Why? He considered how to explain something that had taken him decades to understand himself. Because I thought moving forward meant never looking back, he said. I thought success was proof that the past didn't matter anymore. And now? Annie asked. And now I'm sitting in his house, Daniel said quietly, holding something I thought I'd left behind forever. Annie accepted this without judgment. Children often did. Grandpa said the past is like a shadow, she said. It follows you whether you like it or not, but it's only scary when you try to outrun it. Daniel felt the truth of that settle into him. A sound at the door made them both look up. A woman stood there, keys in hand, clearly surprised to see a stranger sitting at the table. She was tired in the way people got when life asked more of them than it gave back. Her posture stiffened just slightly. Annie? She said. Who's this? Annie slid off her chair and went to her. Mama, she said. This is the man Grandpa told me about. The woman's eyes shifted back to Daniel, sharper now, more cautious. I'm sorry, she said. Which man? Daniel stood. He didn't reach out his hand. He remembered the old man's lessons, respect first. My name is Daniel Harper, he said. Your father helped me years ago. when I had nowhere else to go." Her expression didn't soften immediately. It deepened instead, as if she were measuring the weight of his words. "He talked about you," she said slowly. "But I never thought." She trailed off, then shook her head. "Annie, go wash your hands," she said gently. "Dinner's almost ready." Annie hesitated, looking between them. "I can stay," she offered. "It's okay," her mother said. "Go on." When Annie disappeared down the hallway, the woman turned back to Daniel. "I'm Carla," she said. "My father didn't take people in lightly." "I know," Daniel replied. "That's why I'm here." Carla crossed her arms, though not defensively, more like she was holding herself together. "He waited for you," she said. "Not every day, but enough that I noticed." Daniel lowered his gaze. "I didn't deserve that." "No," she said. "But he didn't do things based on who deserved what." Daniel glanced at the envelope still on the table. "He never used the money," he said. Carla let out a breath. "I know. He told me not to touch it. Said it wasn't his." Daniel nodded. "He called me his son. It's due." Carla's eyes flickered, surprised but not offended. "That sounds like him," she said after a moment. "He had a way of choosing family." They stood there in shared silence, the kind built from understanding rather than discomfort. "I don't want to disrupt your lives," Daniel said finally. "I just needed to come back. To know." Carla studied him carefully. "And now that you do?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. The old instincts rose up: solutions, plans, money as a way to smooth over pain. He pushed them aside. "Now I want to listen," he said. "If you'll let me." Carla nodded once. "Then sit," she said. "My father didn't like conversations held standing up." They sat at the table, the envelope between them like a quiet witness. "He talked about you when he got sick," Carla said. "Said if anything happened to him, and you came back, I should let you decide what to do with it." "With the money?" Daniel asked. "With the truth," she replied. Daniel absorbed that. Outside, the light faded further, the room filling with the soft hum of evening. "I built a life I thought would protect me from this," Daniel said. "From feeling like I owed something I could never repay." Carla nodded. "And now? And now I realize the debt was never about money," he said. "It was about remembering who I was when someone saw me as worth saving." Carla looked toward the hallway where Annie had gone. "She's strong," she said quietly. "But she's still a child." "With this 9. Daniel followed her gaze. "I know." Another pause. "I don't know what this means yet," Carla continued. "But if you're going to be here, you should know something." "Yes?" Daniel said. "My father believed that justice isn't loud," she said. "He said it doesn't announce itself. It just shows up when it's needed." Daniel felt those words settle deep, aligning with something he had always sensed but never named. "I think," he said slowly, "that's why he waited." Carla met his eyes. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe he just trusted you'd come back when you were ready." From down the hallway, Annie's voice called out, "Mama? Can he stay for dinner?" Carla looked at Daniel. For the first time, there was no suspicion in her eyes, only possibility. "Yes," she called back. Then, to Daniel, "You can stay." Daniel nodded. "Thank you." As he sat back down, he realized something quietly, without fanfare. Coming back hadn't been the hardest part. Staying would be. Dinner was simple, the kind of meal that didn't try to impress anyone. Daniel noticed that first. There was no apology for it. No explanation. Just 3 plates set on the table as if his presence had been expected all along. Carla moved with quiet efficiency, her back straight despite the long day written into her shoulders. Annie sat swinging her legs, humming softly to herself while waiting. Daniel watched them from his chair, unsure where to place his hands, his posture suddenly awkward in a way it hadn't been since his 20s. "Grandpa always said food tastes better when people eat together," Annie announced, reaching for her fork. Daniel smiled faintly. He was right. Carla glanced at him. "He used to say a lot of things," she said. "Most people didn't listen." Daniel nodded. "I did," he said. "I just didn't understand until much later." They ate in near silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt earned. Daniel found himself slowing down, noticing small things, the way Annie waited until everyone was served before taking a bite, the way Carla poured water without being asked, the way the chair beneath him creaked in a familiar rhythm. These were details he had paid other people to manage for years. Here, they mattered. After a while, Annie looked up at him. "Mama says you're important," she said matter-of-factly. Carla froze for half a second. "Annie, it's okay," Daniel said gently. "What makes you say that?" Annie shrugged. "You talk like Grandpa," she said. "Like you think before you speak." Daniel felt that land deeper than any compliment he'd received in his adult life. "That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me," he replied. Annie smiled, satisfied. When the plates were cleared, Carla leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely. "You said you wanted to listen," she said. "So listen to this." Daniel straightened. "I am. My father didn't save you because he expected anything back," she said. "He did it because he'd been hungry once too. Because he knew what it felt like to be invisible." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know. No," Carla corrected gently. "You know now. But back then, you were just trying to survive." Daniel accepted that. "You're right," she continued. "When you left, he never spoke badly of you. Not once. People asked why he let you go without a word. He said holding on too tight was another way of stealing someone's future." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. He could hear the old man's voice saying exactly that. "I thought success would make it right," Daniel said. "I told myself that one day I'd come back with enough to make the debt disappear." Carla shook her head. "That wasn't the debt." Annie, sensing the weight of the conversation, slid off her chair and padded over to Daniel. She rested her chin on the edge of the table, looking up at him. "Grandpa said you'd look tired," she said. Daniel let out a soft laugh. "Did he?" She nodded. "He said some kinds of tired don't go away with sleep." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. 6 years old, and already carrying words most adults never learn to say out loud. "I am tired," he admitted, "but not in the way I used to be." Carla watched this exchange closely. "What way is that?" she asked. "I used to be tired of not having," Daniel said. "Now I'm tired of pretending I don't feel." That earned a quiet nod from her. The envelope still sat on the table, untouched. Carla glanced at it. "You don't have to open it tonight," she said. "My father believed in timing." Daniel rested his palm flat on the table beside it. "I think I know what's inside," he said. "But I'm not sure I know what to do with it yet." "That's honest," Carla replied. He respected honesty more than certainty. Aisles. The room fell quiet again. Outside, a car passed, its headlights briefly washing over the wall before moving on. Daniel felt strangely anchored, as if the world could rush past all it wanted and he'd still be right here. "Why did you really come back?" Carla asked after a while. Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. "Because I started dreaming about him," he said. "Not about the bread, not about the bus station, about the way he looked at me when I left, like he wasn't losing anything, like he was giving something back." Carla's eyes softened. "He always did that," she said. "He gave without acting like it cost him." "It cost him," Daniel said quietly. "He just didn't make it visible." Annie yawned, rubbing her eyes. Carla glanced at her watch. "Bedtime," she said. Annie frowned. "Can he stay tomorrow too?" she asked, not even looking at Daniel, as if the decision had already been made. Carla met Daniel's eyes. There was a question there, but also a challenge. Not about money, not about promises, about presence. "I don't have anywhere else I need to be," Daniel said carefully. "If that's all right," Carla nodded once. "Then you can stay." Annie smiled, satisfied, and disappeared down the hallway. When they were alone, Carla spoke again. "You should know something," she said. "My father didn't just wait for you. He prepared for you." Daniel looked up. "What do you mean?" "He kept notes," she said, "about the bus station, about the people who came through, about you." She paused. "He said, The world forgets men like him, but paper remembers. Daniel felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Where are they? In a box, Carla replied. In the bedroom. The one you haven't gone into yet. Daniel nodded slowly. Then maybe tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, Carla agreed. As Daniel stood to leave the table, he realized something that unsettled him more than grief ever had. He wasn't here as a visitor anymore. He was here as someone whose presence would matter. And that, he knew, would require more from him than writing a check ever could. Daniel woke before the house did. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of the small guest room Carla had offered him. The mattress was firmer than he was used to, the blanket thinner, but he hadn't slept this deeply in years. There had been no dreams of boardrooms or numbers ticking upward, only fragments bread wrapped in brown paper, a wooden cane tapping against concrete, a voice telling him to eat slowly. He sat up and listened. The house was quiet in a way that felt intentional, as if it had learned patience from the man who once lived in it. Daniel dressed without hurry, smoothing his shirt the way he used to before stepping outside with the old man each morning. For the first time in a long while, he didn't check his phone. He stepped into the hallway. The bedroom door at the end remained closed. Carla had said the box was in there. He stopped himself from reaching for the handle. Not yet. Instead, he moved toward the kitchen. Carla was already there, standing at the counter with a mug in her hands. She looked up when she heard him. "You're up early," she said. "So were you," Daniel replied. She nodded toward the coffee pot. He never slept in. Said mornings were too honest to waste. Daniel smiled faintly. That sounds familiar. They sat at the table, coffee steaming between them. The envelope rested where Daniel had left it the night before, untouched. "Annie's still asleep," Carla said. "She stayed up later than usual. I can leave before she wakes," Daniel said automatically. Carla studied him. "You could," she said. "But you don't have to." Daniel nodded, accepting that. After a moment, he said, "You mentioned a box." Carla's gaze flicked toward the hallway. "He kept it under the bed," she said. "Said some things shouldn't be out in the open unless someone was ready to see them." "Well," Daniel wrapped his hands around the mug, grounding himself. "I think I am." Carla stood and led the way. The bedroom felt different in daylight, less like a place frozen in time, more like one waiting to be spoken to. Carla knelt and pulled out a small wooden box, scuffed at the corners, the lid worn smooth from years of handling. She placed it on the bed and stepped back. Daniel sat beside it but didn't open it right away. "Did he ever talk about his son?" he asked quietly. Carla's expression tightened, just a little. "Not much," she said. "He respected distance. My brother left young, wanted more than this place could give him. And you stayed," Daniel said. "I stayed because someone had to," she replied. "And because I wanted to." Daniel nodded. He understood that kind of choice. He lifted the lid. Inside were notebooks, neatly stacked, their covers faded. A folded bus schedule, a photograph of the old man standing beside the bread table, cane in one hand, a younger Daniel half out of frame. And beneath it all, a letter, sealed, but never sent. Daniel's breath caught. "He wrote," Carla said softly. But he didn't mail things he wasn't sure would arrive. Daniel picked up the top notebook. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. Dates lined the margins. Names. Small observations. "He recorded everyone," Daniel murmured. "Not just me," Carla nodded. "He said people deserve to be remembered, even if no one else thought so." Daniel flipped a few pages, then stopped. His name stared back at him. Daniel Harper. Arrived hungry. Quiet. Polite. Afraid but trying not to be. He swallowed. "He saw me," Daniel said. "Before I even knew who I was." Carla leaned against the dresser. He had a way of doing that. Daniel closed the notebook and reached for the letter. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of words that had waited years for this moment. "You don't have to read it now," Carla said. "I know," Daniel replied. "But I think he wanted me to." He broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The letter wasn't long. It spoke of pride. Not in success, but in effort. Of hope. Not that Daniel would become wealthy, but that he would remain kind. It spoke of mistakes made, of sons who left, and of the understanding that love didn't require ownership. At the end, one line stood alone. Justice isn't about being fair. It's about being faithful to what's right, even when no one is watching. Daniel lowered the letter slowly. I spent my life thinking justice was something you built systems for, he said. Laws, contracts, enforcement. And now? Carla asked. And now I think it starts much smaller, he replied. At a table, with bread, a soft sound came from the doorway. Annie stood there, rubbing her eyes. Morning, she said sleepily. Daniel smiled at her. Good morning. She padded into the room, peering into the box. You found it, she said. Yes, Daniel replied. Your grandpa kept everything. Annie nodded seriously. He said, forgetting is easy, she said. Remembering takes work. Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. He was right. She looked at the letter in his hand. Did it say something important? Yes, Daniel said honestly. It reminded me what I owe. Annie considered that. You don't look sad, she said. Just heavy. That's a good way to put it, Daniel said. She reached out and touched the edge of the box. Grandpa said, heavy things aren't always bad, she said. Sometimes they keep you from floating away. Daniel laughed softly, the sound surprising him. Later, as Carla began preparing breakfast and Annie set the table, Daniel stood by the window, looking out toward where the bus station used to be alive. He understood something then, with a clarity that made his chest ache. Coming back wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of being accountable to memory, to people, to the quiet kind of justice that didn't announce itself but waited patiently for someone willing to carry it forward. Daniel spent the rest of the morning where the old man would have wanted him outside. The sun was already high when he stepped into the yard, sleeves rolled up, jacket forgotten on the back of a chair inside. The grass had grown uneven along the edges of the house, stubborn in places where footsteps had once kept it tame. Daniel stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, unsure where to begin. He hadn't felt this kind of uncertainty in years. In his world, uncertainty was something you paid consultants to eliminate. Here, it waited patiently for him to choose. He found an old rake leaning against the side of the house. The handle was smooth from use, the metal teeth bent slightly out of line. He ran his thumb along the wood, feeling grooves worn by hands that had worked without gloves. Then he started raking. The motion was simple. Forward, pull back, again. Again. Leaves and debris gathered slowly into small piles. Daniel's shoulders tightened, then loosened. Sweat formed at his temples. His breathing fell into rhythm with the work. He hadn't done anything like this in years. Not really. Even when he exercised, it was measured, timed, optimized. This wasn't about improvement. It was about attention. You don't have to do that. Daniel turned. Carla stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching him. I know, he said, but I want to. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. He used to say wanting to matters more than finishing. Daniel smiled faintly. I think I'm starting to understand him better now. Carla stepped out onto the porch. He liked mornings like this, she said. Said they didn't rush you. Daniel leaned on the rake. He taught me how to work, he said, not just how to earn. Carla's gaze softened. He did that for a lot of people, she replied. Most never came back. Daniel felt the weight of that settle on him. I wish I had. To ride have again. Carla didn't answer right away. Then she said, You're here now. A small voice cut through the quiet. Mama. They both turned. Annie stood on the porch, holding a pair of mismatched gloves. Grandpa's, she said, holding them up. You should wear them. Daniel walked over and took them gently. They were too small for him, stretched thin at the fingers, but he pulled them on anyway. Thank you, he said. She smiled, pleased. He didn't like splinters. I have a god. Daniel went back to work, slower now, more deliberate. Annie sat on the steps, watching him with the same serious attention she gave everything. After a while, she spoke. Why didn't you come back sooner? The question wasn't accusatory. It was curious. That somehow made it harder. Daniel stopped raking. He thought carefully before answering. Because I was afraid. he said at last. Annie tilted her head. Of what? Of finding out that I didn't matter as much as I hoped, he said, or that I mattered too much, and had failed anyway. She considered this. Grandpa said fear is sneaky, she said. It pretends it's helping. Daniel laughed softly. Your grandpa was very wise, she shrugged. He listened more than he talked. Daniel resumed raking. I spent a long time trying to prove something, he said. That I wasn't the boy who needed help anymore. And did you? Annie asked. Daniel paused. Yes, he said. But I forgot something along the way, too. What? That needing help didn't make me weak, he replied. It made me human. Annie nodded, satisfied. By midday, the yard looked different. Not perfect, but cared for. Daniel washed his hands at the outdoor spigot, the cold water stinging pleasantly. Carla brought out sandwiches on a plate and set them on the porch steps. Lunch, she said. Daniel sat beside Annie. He took a bite and froze. It's bread, he said quietly. Like his. Carla nodded. Same recipe. We rarely time. Daniel chewed slowly, eyes distant. He used to tear off pieces and hand them to people without looking, he said. Like he trusted the bread to do the talking. He said food doesn't ask questions, Carla replied. They ate in companionable silence. After lunch, Daniel found himself standing at the edge of the property, looking toward where the bus station once stood. The ground there was cracked, weeds pushing through the concrete like stubborn memories. He could almost hear the echoes of engines, footsteps, voices calling destinations. I stood right there, he said aloud. That morning, Carla came to stand beside him. He told me, she said. Said you looked like you were deciding whether to disappear or ask for help. Daniel nodded. I almost disappeared, but you didn't, Carla said. No, Daniel agreed. Because he saw me. Carla turned to face him. You should know something, she said. My father didn't see himself as saving people. Daniel looked at her. He said he was just interrupting bad endings, she continued. Giving people time to choose a different one. Daniel let that sink in. Then he interrupted mine, he said. In the best way. Carla nodded. He believed interruptions mattered. That afternoon, Daniel made a call he had been putting off since arriving. He stepped aside, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. He didn't talk about money. He talked about permits, about land records, about who owned what now that the bus station was gone and the property lines had blurred. When he hung up, Annie was watching him. You're not leaving, are you? She asked. Daniel crouched down so he was eye level with her. No, he said. I'm making sure something stays. She studied his face, searching for certainty. Then she nodded. As the sun dipped lower, Daniel sat alone on the porch steps. The envelope was in his pocket now. The letter folded neatly inside his jacket. He hadn't put it away. He hadn't framed it. He kept it close, where he could feel its weight. He understood something new, something uncomfortable and necessary. The old man hadn't just given him a place to stand 15 years ago. He had handed him a responsibility. And responsibilities, Daniel knew now, didn't expire just because time passed. They waited. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. He lay awake listening to the house, breathed the soft settling of wood, the distant hum of traffic that never quite reached this street. Every sound felt familiar and foreign at the same time, like a language he used to speak fluently and had forgotten through disuse. When morning finally came, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like an invitation. By mid-morning, Daniel stood at the edge of the old bus station lot. Up close, the place looked smaller than it had in his memory. The concrete was cracked, weeds pushing through in defiant green lines. The shelter where people once waited had collapsed on one side, its metal frame twisted, paint peeled down to rust. A faded transit map still clung to one wall. Destinations no longer served, routes that led nowhere now. This is where he stood, Daniel said aloud. He could see it clearly, the folding table, the bread laid out in neat rows, the cane leaning against the edge. He could see himself too, thinner, hollow-eyed, pretending not to look desperate. The memory hit him not as nostalgia, but as accountability. Carla approached quietly, stopping a few steps behind him. I wondered when you'd come out here, she said. I needed to see it, Daniel replied. Not the way I remember it. The way it is. Carla nodded. The city shut it down years ago, said it wasn't worth fixing. Daniel let out a short breath. That sounds familiar. She didn't disagree. They walked slowly across the lot. Daniel stopped where the concrete changed color slightly, darker than the rest. Right here, he said. This is where I collapsed. Carla looked down, then back up at him. My father said he thought you were dead at first. Daniel's chest tightened. I almost was. He didn't hesitate, she said. Just put down the bread and went to you. Daniel smiled faintly. That was him, always choosing people over plans. Carla studied his face. You're not here just to remember, are you? Daniel shook his head. No. He took a step back and looked at the entire lot again, not with the eyes of a businessman, but with the eyes of someone measuring harm and possibility at the same time. I made a call yesterday, he said. About this land. Carla stiffened slightly. And it's complicated, Daniel replied. The ownership changed hands twice after the station closed. The city still has an easement. Nothing clean, nothing simple. Carla exhaled. It never is. But it's possible, Daniel added. To do something here. Not just tear it down. Not just leave it to rot. Carla crossed her arms. What kind of something? Daniel didn't answer right away. He knelt and picked up a small piece of broken concrete, turning it over in his hand. My whole life, I've built things that made sense on paper, he said. Structures, systems, returns. He stood again. This place doesn't need another structure, he continued. It needs to be interrupted. Carla looked at him sharply. Interrupted how? Daniel met her gaze. By memory, he said. By use. By people. They stood there, the weight of that idea settling between them. Behind them, Annie's voice cut through the air. Mama, they turned. Annie was running toward them, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. You weren't gone long, she said, slightly out of breath. Daniel smiled. I told you I wasn't leaving. She nodded, satisfied. Then she looked around. This is the place Grandpa worked, she said. Yes, Daniel replied. This is where he taught me how to stand. Annie walked slowly across the cracked concrete, her small steps careful. It's sad, she said. But not broken. Daniel felt something shift inside him. That's exactly right, he said. She stopped and looked up at him. Are you going to fix it? Daniel hesitated. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he knew the cost of saying it out loud. I'm not going to fix it, he said carefully. I'm going to protect it. Annie frowned. What's the difference? Daniel crouched to her level. Fixing something usually means making it look new, he said. Protecting something means making sure it can still do what it was meant to do. She thought about that. What was this meant to do? Daniel glanced at Carla, then back at Annie. It was meant to help people keep going, he said. Even when they didn't know where they were going next. Annie nodded slowly. Grandpa would like that. Carla watched Daniel closely. This isn't charity, she said. Is it? No, Daniel replied immediately. It's responsibility. They walked back toward the house together. Halfway there, Daniel stopped and pulled out his phone again. This time, he didn't step away. I need to make a few more calls, he said. And I need to be clear about something. Carla waited. I'm not doing this alone, Daniel continued. Whatever happens here, it happens with you. With Annie. With the people who already belong to this place. Carla studied him for a long moment. My father used to say something about men who arrive with answers, she said. Daniel smiled slightly. Let me guess. He didn't trust them. Winfried. He trusted men who asked better questions, she replied. Daniel nodded. Then here's mine, he said. What does this place need most right now? Carla looked back toward the bus station lot, then down at Annie, then back at Daniel. Time, she said, and someone willing to stay when it gets uncomfortable. Daniel felt the truth of that settle into his bones. I can do uncomfortable, he said. I've been avoiding it my whole life. Annie reached out and took his hand without asking. Her grip was small but firm. Then you should start here, she said. Daniel looked down at her. Then at the place where his life had been rerouted by a man with a cane and a table of bread. Yes, he said quietly, I should. And for the first time since he arrived, Daniel understood that this wasn't about returning to the past. It was about standing in the exact place where the future had once been saved and deciding not to walk away from it again. By the third day, the house no longer felt like it was waiting to see what Daniel would do. It felt like it was watching how he did it. Morning came with a steady rhythm now. Carla left early for work. Annie followed soon after with her backpack and carefully tied shoes. And Daniel stayed behind in the quiet that settled once the door closed. He had declined the offer of a driver without explanation. Walking, he found, gave him time to think without pretending he wasn't. He spent that morning on the phone again, but the calls were different this time. Fewer explanations. Fewer negotiations. He asked questions instead about zoning, about community use, about what happened to people when places like the bus station were shut down and no one bothered to replace them with anything else. Most answers were vague. Some were defensive. A few were honest. When he hung up, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and stared at the envelope one more time. Not the letter inside it, he had already memorized those words, but the paper itself. How many times had the old man picked it up, felt its weight, then set it back down without opening it? Not out of pride, out of certainty. He slid the envelope into the box beneath the bed, where it had lived for years. It didn't belong in his pocket anymore. That afternoon, Daniel walked the neighborhood. It was the kind of place most people passed through without noticing. Small houses, narrow driveways, children's bikes leaned against fences with rusted chains. A grocery store on the corner with faded signage and a bulletin board covered in handwritten notes. Lost pets, babysitting, church dinners. People noticed him anyway, not because he was famous. Not here, but because he didn't fit. He nodded politely, made eye contact, said hello. A few people nodded back. Others watched from behind curtains. He understood the hesitation. He'd spent years being the kind of man people expected to want something. By the time he returned, Annie was already home, sitting at the table with her homework spread out in careful rows. You're late, she said without looking up. Daniel checked the clock. I didn't know I had a schedule. She glanced up at him. Grandpa always came back before the sun went down. Daniel smiled. Then I'll remember that. She pushed a piece of paper toward him. I don't understand this one. He sat beside her, leaning in. The problem was simple. He walked her through it slowly, resisting the urge to rush. When she finally nodded, understanding settling into place, she smiled not wide, but certain. You're a good teacher, she said. Daniel paused. I'm learning. That evening, Carla came home quieter than usual. She moved through the house with care, her shoulders heavy. Long day? Daniel asked. She nodded. Longer than most. Annie looked between them, then gathered her things. I'm going to read, she announced, disappearing into her room. When they were alone, Carla spoke. Someone from the city stopped by today, she said, asking questions. Daniel didn't flinch. About the land? About you, she corrected. Daniel nodded slowly. That was bound to happen. Carla leaned against the counter. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer honestly. He met her eyes. Go ahead. Are you doing this because you feel guilty? She asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was calm. Guilt brought me back, he said. But it's not why I'm staying. Carla watched him closely. Then why are you? Daniel considered the question, turning it over carefully. Because I've spent my life moving forward without checking who got left behind, he said. And because your father showed me what happens when someone doesn't do that. Resent. I goes in. Carla's jaw tightened slightly. Good intentions don't protect children, she said. I know, Daniel replied. That's why I'm not asking you to trust intentions. She waited. I'm asking you to watch actions, he said, and to stop me if they start looking like something else. That seemed to satisfy her for now. That night, after Annie was asleep, Daniel stepped out onto the porch alone. The air had cooled, carrying the faint sound of traffic from far away. He thought about the bus station again, about what it had meant to people who passed through without ever leaving a mark. He realized then that places like that weren't just about movement. They were about pause. The next morning, he took Annie with him. They walked together to the edge of the old lot. She carried a small notebook and a pencil, clutching them with purpose. "What's that for?" Daniel asked. She looked up at him. "You said we're protecting this place," she replied. Grandpa said, "Protecting starts with paying attention." Daniel smiled. "He said that?" She nodded. All the time, they walked slowly, Annie stopping often to write things down. A crack shaped like a lightning bolt. A bench leg still standing. A piece of blue tile half buried in dirt. "Why are you writing those?" Daniel asked. "So we don't forget," she said simply. Daniel felt a quiet ache in his chest. "You're right." As they stood there, a man approached from the far side of the lot. Older than Daniel, younger than the old man had been. He wore a jacket with a city emblem stitched on the sleeve. "You the one asking questions?" the man asked. Daniel nodded. "I am." The man glanced at Annie, then back at Daniel. "This place has history," he said. "But history doesn't pay for upkeep." Daniel held his gaze. "Neither does neglect," he replied. The man studied him for a moment longer. "You'll need more than good words," he said. Daniel didn't argue. "I know," he said. "I'm ready for that." The man nodded once and walked away. Annie looked up at Daniel. "Was that a test?" Daniel thought about it. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it was a warning." She scribbled something else in her notebook. Grandpa said warnings are just advice that hasn't learned how to be kind yet. Daniel laughed quietly. "I wish I'd known him longer." She closed the notebook and slipped her hand into his. "He knew you long enough," she said. "Now you just have to do your part." "Oh." Daniel squeezed her hand gently, feeling the weight of that responsibility settle not as a burden, but as something earned. As they walked back toward the house, Daniel understood that this chapter of his life wouldn't be measured in outcomes or headlines. It would be measured in days like this. Days where he stayed. The first letter arrived on a Thursday. Daniel found it tucked between grocery flyers and a utility bill, its official seal standing out against the ordinary clutter of the day. He recognized the weight of it before he opened it. Paper like that never carried good news on its own. He set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment. Annie was on the floor nearby, coloring carefully inside the lines of a drawing she'd brought home from school. Carla was still at work. The house was quiet enough that Daniel could hear the faint scratch of the crayon against paper. "Is that bad mail?" Annie asked without looking up. Daniel glanced at her. "What makes you think that?" She shrugged. "Bad mail makes people stop breathing for a second." He smiled, despite himself. "You're very observant." He waited until she finished coloring before opening the envelope. Inside was a notice from the city, formal, measured, politely threatening. It referenced the old bus station lot, cited safety concerns, liability issues, and the possibility of enforced action if the area continued to attract unauthorized use. Daniel folded the letter neatly and set it aside. Annie looked up at him now. "Are they mad?" "No," Daniel said. "They're cautious." Grandpa said cautious people get scared when things don't stay quiet, she said. "That sounds like him," Daniel replied. That afternoon, Daniel didn't make calls. He went back to the lot instead. He walked it slowly, noticing things he'd missed before: the way the concrete dipped near one corner, how the remaining shelter still blocked wind from the north. He imagined people standing there with bags at their feet, checking watches, waiting for something to arrive or something to leave. He thought about how many times he'd waited like that himself. A man approached him near the edge of the property. Older, gray at the temples, hands rough from work. "You're the one stirring things up," the man said, not unkindly. Daniel nodded. "I suppose I am." The man gestured around them. "This place been dead a long time." "Dead isn't the same as gone," Daniel replied. The man studied him for a moment. "Your friend with the cane," he said. "Good man." Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest. "You knew him?" "Everyone did," the man replied. "Didn't talk much, didn't judge. Fed you if you were hungry." Daniel nodded. He saved my life. It is Mark. The man didn't seem surprised. He did that a lot. That evening, Carla came home holding a similar envelope. They sent you one too? Daniel asked. She nodded. Different words. Same message. They sat at the table together, the letters between them. This is where things get complicated, Carla said. People don't like it when you remind them of what they've ignored. Daniel leaned back in his chair. I'm not here to remind them, he said. I'm here to change what comes next. Carla watched him carefully. You understand they'll look at your money before they listen to your reasons. Yes, Daniel said, and I won't let them confuse the two. Later that night, Annie crept out of her room and sat beside Daniel on the couch. Are you leaving? She asked quietly. Daniel turned to her. Why would you think that? Because people leave when things get hard, she said. Grandpa said that too. Daniel considered his answer carefully. Some people do, he said, but not this time. She leaned against his arm, satisfied. The next morning, Daniel attended a small community meeting at the local center. Folding chairs, weak coffee, wary faces. He didn't introduce himself as anything special. Just Daniel. People spoke about safety, about noise, about kids cutting through the lot, about memories they didn't know what to do with anymore. When it was Daniel's turn, he stood slowly. I'm not here to build something shiny, he said. I'm here because someone once stood on that concrete and decided not to walk past me. The room went quiet. That place kept me alive long enough to become someone else, he continued. And I think it can still do that for people who don't have anywhere else to pause. No applause, no objections, just attention. Afterward, a woman approached him. You won't win everyone, she said. Daniel nodded. I know, but you might win enough, she replied. That night, Daniel pulled the envelope from his pocket and reread the old man's letter. Justice isn't about being fair. It's about being faithful to what's right, even when no one is watching. He understood now what that meant. Justice wasn't the city's approval. Justice was staying when leaving would be easier. The pushback didn't come loudly at first. It arrived in glances that lingered too long, in phone calls that went unanswered, in polite emails that said very little but meant a great deal. Daniel recognized the pattern immediately. Resistance dressed up as procedure, delay disguised as caution. He had used it himself once, when saying no outright felt impolite. This time, he didn't flinch. On Monday morning, a city inspector showed up at the house. Daniel watched from the porch as the man stepped out of a white sedan, clipboard tucked under his arm, posture already defensive. Carla stood beside Daniel, her arms folded, Annie hovering a few steps behind them, quiet, but attentive. Mr. Harper, the inspector said, checking the name. I'm here to follow up on reports regarding unauthorized activity near the old transit lot. Daniel nodded. You're welcome to look. The man hesitated, clearly expecting argument. You understand there are safety liabilities, he said. The city could be held responsible if— I understand liability very well, Daniel replied calmly. I also understand neglect. The inspector glanced at Annie, then back at Daniel. This isn't personal. It never is, Daniel said. They walked the lot together. The inspector pointed out cracks, loose metal, faded warnings. Daniel listened without interrupting. When the man finished, Daniel said, Everything you said is correct. The inspector blinked. Then you agree this place needs to be closed off? No, Daniel replied. I agree it needs to be cared for. The man sighed. That takes resources. Daniel met his gaze. So does ignoring it. The inspector made a note, his pen pressing harder than necessary. I'll file my report, he said. The city will decide next steps. Daniel nodded. I'll be here. That afternoon, Carla confronted Daniel in the kitchen. You know what they're doing, she said. They're waiting for you to get tired. Daniel poured himself a glass of water. They don't know me very well. This isn't a game, Carla said. They'll try to take control, or shut it down, or make it impossible for you to stay involved without turning it into a spectacle. Daniel leaned against the counter. Then we don't let them. Carla studied him. How? By refusing to disappear, he replied. By keeping this place visible, not loud. Useful, not profitable. Carla exhaled. You talk like this is simple. It isn't, Daniel said. But it is clear. That evening, Annie brought home a permission slip. There's a field trip next week, she said, handing it to Carla. To the museum. Carla glanced at the date. I'll have to take time off. I can go, Daniel said before thinking. Both of them looked at him. You don't have to, Carla said carefully. I know, Daniel replied. I want to. Annie's face lit up. Grandpa would have liked that, she said. Daniel smiled. I hope so. The night before the trip, Daniel received another letter. This one wasn't from the city. It was from a developer. Polite, complimentary, curious. They had heard of his interest in the area. They admired his vision. They proposed a partnership revitalization with returns. History packaged into something marketable, safe, controlled. Daniel read the letter twice, then folded it and set it aside. Later, as he sat on the porch, Carla joined him. More mail? She asked. Yes, Daniel said. Different kind. She didn't need him to explain. And it would be easy, Daniel said. To say yes. To let someone else shape this into something cleaner. But, Carla prompted, but that would turn memory into decoration, Daniel replied. And your father didn't live his life to become a theme. Carla nodded slowly. No, she said. He didn't. The field trip day arrived gray and cool. Daniel stood among parents and chaperones, feeling strangely out of place and deeply grounded at the same time. Annie walked beside him, holding his hand with casual confidence. Inside the museum, she moved from exhibit to exhibit, asking questions, reading plaques aloud. Daniel watched her take in the world with curiosity, unburdened by fear. At one display about local history, Annie stopped. There, she said, pointing to a black and white photo. That's the bus station. 2. Daniel leaned closer. The image was old, grainy, but unmistakable. That's where Grandpa worked, Annie said. Yes, Daniel replied. That's where he mattered. An older volunteer overheard them. That station fed a lot of people, she said. Not officially, but everyone knew. Daniel nodded. Some of the most important work never is. On the way home, Annie fell asleep in the car, her head resting against the window. Daniel glanced at her in the rearview mirror, then back to the road. That night, he made another call. Not to the city, not to investors, to a local nonprofit that worked with displaced families. I don't want a program, he told them. I want a place. Somewhere people can pause without being judged. There was a pause on the other end. That kind of place is hard to keep open, the voice said. I know, Daniel replied. That's why I'm staying. He hung up and sat in the quiet. The pressure was building. He could feel it now, expectations forming on all sides, each demanding a version of him that fit neatly into their narrative. But the old man's voice was clearer than all of it. Justice isn't loud. Daniel stood and looked out toward the lot one more time. They could send letters. They could file reports. They could wait him out. He wasn't going anywhere. The first phone call came just after sunrise. Daniel recognized the number immediately, not because he'd saved it, but because it was the kind of number that didn't call twice unless it expected to be answered. He stood at the kitchen window, watching Annie tie her shoes at the table while Carla poured coffee, and let it ring once more before picking up. Daniel Harper, he said. Mr. Harper, the voice replied, smooth and practiced. This is Councilman Reed. I appreciate you taking the time. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Good morning, he said evenly. I won't take much of it, Reed continued. I wanted to speak directly. Things have gotten noticed. Daniel glanced at Annie, who was humming softly, unaware. That happens when people pay attention, he said. A brief pause. You've stirred interest in the old transit lot, Reed said. Some concern as well. I've read the letters, Daniel replied. I'm sure you have too. Reed cleared his throat. We're willing to discuss options. Structured ones. The city doesn't want conflict. Daniel smiled faintly. Neither do I. Then perhaps you'd consider stepping back, Reed suggested, letting professionals handle redevelopment. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. That depends on what you mean by redevelopment. A controlled solution, Reed said. Safe, profitable, sustainable. Daniel looked at Carla now. She was watching him closely, her expression unreadable. Those words don't mean the same thing to everyone, Daniel said. Especially controlled. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Harper, Reed said, you're a respected figure. You don't need to be involved in something this messy. Daniel's voice stayed calm. I do, he said. That's exactly why I need to be involved. When the call ended, the kitchen felt quieter than before. Carla didn't ask what was said. She didn't have to. They're pushing, she said. Yes, Daniel replied. Gently. For now, Annie looked up from her shoes. Who was that? Someone who wants things to stay easy, Daniel said. Annie frowned. Easy for who? Daniel smiled at her. That's a very good question. Later that morning, Daniel walked to the community center again. Not for a meeting this time, but to listen. He sat in the back while a group of residents spoke about rising rents, about places disappearing, about how nothing ever seemed to be built for people like them. One man stood and said, "They always show up with plans after the damage is done." Daniel felt the truth of that settle into his chest. Afterward, the man approached him. "You're the one from the lot," he said. Daniel nodded. "I am." The man studied him. "You don't look like the kind who stays." Daniel met his gaze. "I didn't used to be." That evening, Annie brought home a drawing. She handed it to Daniel with both hands. "I made this for the place," she said. It was simple crayon lines forming a bench, a small table, stick figures standing close together. Above it, she had written carefully, "Waiting is easier when you're not alone." Daniel swallowed hard. "That's beautiful," he said. "Grandpa said waiting is part of being brave," Annie replied. Not leaving, Carla watched this exchange from the doorway, her expression softening despite herself. That night, another email arrived. This one wasn't polite. It warned of legal complications, of liability exposure, of reputational risk. Daniel read it once, then deleted it. He pulled the old man's letter from the drawer and read the final line again. Justice isn't about being fair. It's about being faithful to what's right, even when no one is watching. He realized something, then something uncomfortable. People were watching now, and that meant the easy part was over. The next day, Daniel made a decision he hadn't planned to make so soon. He invited the city to the lot, not for a press event, not for an announcement. Just a walk. An invitation to stand on the cracked concrete and see what was there and what wasn't. Carla looked at him when he told her. "That puts you in the open." "Yes," Daniel said. "Where this belongs." On the morning of the walk, Annie stood beside him, holding her notebook. She looked small next to the officials gathering at the edge of the lot, their suits sharp against the worn ground. One of them glanced at Annie. "Is this appropriate?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "She belongs here," he said. "So do you." They walked slowly. Daniel didn't lecture. He pointed. He listened. He told one story about a man with a cane and a table of bread. He didn't name himself in it. When they reached the center of the lot, Daniel stopped. "This place saved my life," he said simply. Not because it was perfect, but because someone chose to stay. The group was quiet. No applause, no promises, but no dismissal either. Afterward, as they dispersed, one official lingered. "You know this won't be easy," she said. Daniel nodded. "I'm counting on that." That night, as Annie slept and Carla graded papers at the table, Daniel sat alone on the porch. The pressure was no longer subtle. It was real now. Measured. Intentional. And yet, beneath it all, he felt something steadier than fear. He felt aligned. He thought of the boy he had been, hungry, proud, invisible. He thought of the man who had interrupted that ending. "I'm here," Daniel said quietly to the empty yard. "I'm staying." The meeting changed the tone of everything that followed. Daniel felt it before anyone said it out loud. The phone calls slowed, but they didn't stop. Emails became more carefully worded, less threatening, more strategic. People weren't backing away anymore. They were circling. He welcomed it. That afternoon, Daniel walked the lot alone. Annie was at school. Carla was still at work. The space felt different without them, larger, quieter, more exposed. He stood near the center, hands in his pockets, letting the weight of the moment settle. This was no longer just memory. This was intent. By evening, Carla noticed the shift too. "They're not trying to scare you anymore," she said as she set dinner on the table. "They're trying to wear you down." Daniel nodded. "That's usually the next step." Annie looked up from her plate. "Why?" "Because," Daniel said gently, "some people don't believe anyone stays unless they're forced to." Annie frowned. "Grandpa stayed." "Yes," Daniel replied. "And it confused a lot of people." That night, Daniel received another call. This one came later, after Annie was asleep and the house had settled into its quiet rhythm. "Mr. Harper," the voice said, "this is Martin Keller. I represent a private development group." Daniel didn't sit down. "I'm listening." "We understand you're emotionally invested," Keller continued. "But emotion doesn't protect you from exposure." Daniel smiled faintly. "Neither does profit." Keller paused. "You could do a lot of good elsewhere," he said. "Places that welcome your involvement." Daniel looked out toward the dark outline of the lot. "I'm exactly where I need to be." When the call ended, Daniel didn't feel shaken. He felt confirmed. The next morning, Carla brought home news. "My brother called," she said, her voice careful. Daniel looked up. "Your brother? He heard about what's happening here," she continued. "Through people, through old contacts." Daniel nodded. "And? He's coming back," she said, "for a visit." Annie looked up sharply. "Uncle James?" "Yes," Carla replied. Annie's excitement was immediate. Daniel noticed Carla's wasn't. "You're not happy," Daniel said later. Once Annie had gone to her room, Carla leaned against the counter. "My brother believes in leaving things behind," she said, "including responsibility." Daniel absorbed that. "And you don't." "No," she said quietly. "I stayed." Daniel nodded. "So did your father." "Yes," Carla replied. "And it cost him." Daniel didn't argue. He knew that kind of cost. James arrived 2 days later. He stepped out of his car with confidence, well-dressed, practiced smile in place. He looked around the neighborhood with polite detachment, as if assessing something already decided. "So this is it," James said. "The place causing all the noise." Daniel watched him closely. "It's quieter than you think," he said. James turned to him. "You must be Daniel." "Yes." James extended his hand. Daniel shook it. "I've heard a lot about you," James said. "Mostly questions." Daniel smiled. "I'm getting used to that." Inside the house, James looked around, taking inventory. "You didn't change much," he said to Carla. "I didn't need to," she replied. James sat, leaning back in his chair. "Dad wouldn't have wanted all this fuss," he said. Daniel met his gaze. "Your father wanted people to be seen," he said. "Fuss wasn't the point." James frowned. "You didn't know him the way I did." Daniel didn't rise to it. "No," he said. "But I know what he did." James glanced toward the hallway where Annie's laughter drifted faintly. "And now you're here," he said, "playing savior." Daniel's voice stayed even. "I'm not saving anyone," he said. "I'm repaying something." James scoffed softly. "With money?" "With presents," Daniel replied. That earned a sharp look. Later, Annie bounded into the room. "Uncle James!" she exclaimed, hugging him. James softened instantly. "There's my favorite girl." Daniel watched the exchange carefully. He saw affection, yes, but distance too. That evening, James and Daniel stood outside together, the lot visible beyond the fence. "You think you can fix this?" James said. "No," Daniel replied. "I think I can protect it." James shook his head. "You'll burn out." "Maybe," Daniel said. "But I won't disappear." James studied him. "Why does this matter so much to you?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. "Because someone once chose not to walk past me," he said. "And the world I live in now is built on that moment." James looked away. "Sentiment doesn't last. Neither does indifference," Daniel said. James left the next morning without much ceremony. Before he did, he pulled Carla aside. Daniel didn't hear what was said. but he saw the tension in her shoulders afterward. He doesn't believe this ends well, Carla said later. Daniel nodded. Neither did a lot of people. 15 years ago, that afternoon, Annie brought home another drawing. This one showed 3 figures standing in a circle. Above them, she'd written, "Staying is a choice." Daniel taped it to the refrigerator. He stood back and looked at it for a long time. The pressure was increasing. The players were changing. The stakes were becoming clearer, but the choice remained the same, and Daniel Harper had already made it. The tension didn't explode. It thickened. Daniel felt it in the way conversations shortened, in how people chose words more carefully around him. James's visit had stirred something loose, something long buried and restless. By the end of the week, it was no longer just officials and developers watching. It was neighbors, old acquaintances, people who remembered the bus station as a problem, not a lifeline. The first confrontation came quietly. Daniel was walking back from the lot when a man stepped out from between 2 parked cars. Middle-aged, clean jacket, the kind of confidence that came from never having to doubt whether he belonged somewhere. "You're Daniel Harper," the man said. Not a question. "Yes," Daniel replied. The man nodded toward the lot. "You're bringing attention we don't need." Daniel studied him. "Attention was always there," he said. "It just wasn't convenient." The man's jaw tightened. "People around here worked hard to move past that place. Some people never got the chance," Daniel replied. The man scoffed. "That's not your problem." Daniel met his eyes. "It is now." The man stepped closer. "You don't understand how things work here." Daniel didn't raise his voice. "I understand exactly how they work," he said. "That's why I'm here." The man hesitated, then backed away, muttering something about outsiders. Daniel watched him go, feeling the familiar pull to disengage, to retreat into distance and power. He stayed. That night, Carla confronted him again, but this time her voice carried something sharper than concern. "James called," she said. "He thinks you're making enemies." Daniel looked up from the table. "I'm making discomfort," he said. "Enemies choose themselves." Carla crossed her arms. "You don't live with the consequences the same way we do." Daniel absorbed that. "You're right," he said. "That's why I won't make decisions without you." Carla studied him, searching for the gap between his words and his actions. "You mean that?" "Yes." Annie wandered in, sensing the shift. "Are people being mean again?" she asked. Carla softened immediately. "Not mean," she said. "Just confused." Annie frowned. Grandpa said, "Confused people get loud." Daniel smiled faintly. He was right. The next morning, the lot was marked. Not officially. No tape, no signs. Just spray paint along the edge of the concrete. A warning disguised as vandalism. Daniel stood there, staring at it, hands in his pockets. Annie was beside him, clutching her notebook. "Is that allowed?" she asked. "No," Daniel said. "Will they erase it?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel replied. "But that's not the point." She looked up at him. "What is the point?" "That someone wants us to stop paying attention," Daniel said. "So they're trying to scare us into looking away. We exit." Annie considered this. "Are you scared?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "I'm cautious." She nodded. "Grandpa said courage isn't not being scared," she said. "It's deciding what's more important." Daniel felt the truth of that settle deep. By midday, the city had responded. Not with apology, but with distance. A statement was issued about ongoing assessments and community impact. It said nothing about responsibility. Daniel read it once and folded it carefully. That evening, the house felt heavier. Carla cooked in silence. Annie colored quietly. Daniel sat at the table. The envelope tucked away in the box beneath the bed. The letter burned into memory. "This is where people usually step back," Carla said finally. Daniel looked up. "Is that what you want?" She shook her head. "No," she said. "But I need to know you won't step forward alone." Daniel nodded. "Then we don't move until we agree." She exhaled, relieved despite herself. Later, Annie climbed into Daniel's lap, something she hadn't done before. She held her notebook open to a blank page. "Can you write something?" she asked. "What?" Daniel said gently. "Something Grandpa would say." she replied. Daniel thought for a long moment. Then he wrote slowly, carefully, letting each word earn its place. Staying doesn't fix everything, but leaving makes sure nothing ever does. Annie read it, then nodded. That's right, she said. That night, Daniel dreamed, not of success, not of failure, of the bus station at dawn, of bread laid out carefully, of a man with a cane watching the world move without rushing it. When he woke, he knew what had to come next. Not a speech, not a deal, a line. The next day, Daniel stood at the edge of the lot and placed a simple bench where the old table had once stood. No plaque, no announcement, just a place to sit. People noticed. Some shook their heads, some slowed down. One man sat for a long time, staring at nothing. By evening, the bench was scuffed, used, claimed. Carla watched from the porch. You're daring them, she said. Daniel shook his head. I'm inviting them. She studied the scene. And if they take it away? Daniel didn't hesitate. Then we put it back. Annie ran up, breathless. Someone said thank you, she said. They didn't say it loud, but I heard it. Daniel smiled. That's how it usually happens. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete, Daniel understood something clearly. This was no longer about him. It was about whether the quiet good that saved one life would be allowed to save another. And that was a fight that didn't end with winning. It ended with staying. The bench didn't last 24 hours. Daniel found it overturned the next morning. One leg cracked, the wood scraped deep where it had been dragged across the concrete. The damage wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to be. It was a message delivered quietly, the way people delivered warnings when they didn't want witnesses. Annie saw it first. They broke it, she said, her voice flat. Daniel walked over slowly. He crouched, ran his hand along the splintered edge. The wood was rough, unfinished, cheap, easy to replace. He stood and looked around the lot. No one nearby. No faces watching from windows. Whoever had done it had made sure of that. Carla stepped up beside him. This was always going to happen, she said. Daniel nodded. I know. Annie hugged her notebook to her chest. Does that mean we stop? Daniel turned to her. He knelt so they were eye level. No, he said gently. It means we decide what kind of stopping they were hoping for. She frowned. There are different kinds? Yes, Daniel said. One makes noise. One keeps going. She thought about that. Grandpa said noisy people want attention, she said. Quiet people want change. Daniel smiled faintly. He said that? She nodded. A lot. Daniel straightened and lifted the bench with Carla's help. They carried it back toward the house without speaking. Inside the garage, Daniel examined the damage more carefully. The leg could be reinforced, the cracks filled. It wouldn't look new again. Good, he thought. Neither did the place. While Carla prepared breakfast, Daniel worked. He didn't rush. He sanded, braced, tightened screws. His hands remembered this kind of work. Not the motions exactly, but the intention behind them, doing something small with care, knowing it mattered to someone even if no one else ever noticed. Annie sat nearby, watching. Are you mad? She asked. Daniel shook his head. I'm focused. She nodded, as if that made sense. By late morning, the bench stood again, slightly crooked, stronger than before. They carried it back together. Daniel placed it exactly where it had been, then stepped back. No announcement. No challenge. Just the bench. Returned. By afternoon, the city responded. A notice was taped to the fence. Temporary closure pending further assessment. Language thick with caution and distance. Carla read it twice. They're escalating. Daniel nodded. So are we. That evening, James called again. Daniel answered this time. You're pushing too hard, James said without greeting. People are getting nervous. Daniel leaned against the porch railing. People get nervous when things stop being predictable. This doesn't end well, James warned. Not for you. Not for Carla. Especially not for Annie. Daniel's jaw tightened. Be careful, he said quietly. James exhaled. You think I'm the enemy. I'm not. No, Daniel replied. You're just used to leaving before things ask too much. I am. Silence stretched on the line. You don't owe him this, James said at last. Daniel's voice softened. I owe him exactly this. James hung up without saying goodbye. That night, Daniel sat alone at the table long after the house had gone quiet. The envelope was still in the box beneath the bed. He hadn't touched it in days. He didn't need to. The letter lived in him now. Justice isn't about being fair. It's about being faithful to what's right, even when no one is watching. Someone was watching now. But that didn't change the meaning. The next morning, a small crowd gathered near the lot. Not a protest, not a rally. Just people standing, sitting on the bench, leaning against the fence. A woman with a stroller. An older man with a paper bag of groceries. A teenager scrolling on his phone, pausing longer than he meant to. Daniel stood back, watching. A city worker approached him quietly. You can't encourage this, the man said. I didn't, Daniel replied. The worker frowned. You know what I mean. Daniel met his eyes. I know what you're afraid of. The worker hesitated, then lowered his voice. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Daniel shook his head. It was already hard. It just wasn't visible. The man walked away without another word. That afternoon, Carla received a call from a colleague. They're talking about taking Annie out of the equation, she said later, her voice tight, framing this as instability, as risk. Now, Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. They won't, he said. Carla looked at him sharply. You don't know that. Daniel nodded. You're right. He paused. That's why I won't give them a reason. That night, Daniel sat with Annie at the table as she worked on her homework. Are people mad at us? She asked suddenly. Daniel considered his answer. Some people are uncomfortable, he said. That's different. Did we do something wrong? No, he said firmly. We did something honest. She nodded, accepting that. Later, after Annie was asleep, Daniel and Carla sat on the porch. This is the part where most people step away, Carla said. They protect themselves. Daniel looked out at the lot. The bench sat there, occupied now by a man he didn't recognize. Shoulders slumped, hands folded. I spent most of my life protecting myself, Daniel said. It didn't make me safe. It made me empty. Carla studied him. And this makes me accountable, he replied. Carla was quiet for a long time. Then she said, If this turns ugly, Daniel interrupted gently. Then we face it together. She nodded. That's what my father would have wanted. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. He could almost hear the cane tapping against concrete, steady and unhurried. The next day, the city scheduled a formal hearing, no longer quiet, no longer subtle. Daniel read the notice, then folded it neatly. The line had been drawn, not by words, by presence. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Daniel arrived early. He sat in the back row of the municipal chamber, hands folded, posture calm. Carla sat beside him, shoulders squared, Annie between them with her feet dangling above the floor. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and coffee that had been reheated too many times. Conversations hummed in low tones, lawyers murmuring, officials shuffling papers, citizens whispering names they hadn't expected to see on the agenda. Daniel had been in rooms like this before. Bigger ones, louder ones, rooms where decisions moved markets and ended careers. This room was smaller, but the weight in it felt heavier, because this time, he couldn't walk away unchanged. Annie leaned toward him. Is this where they decide? She whispered. Daniel nodded. Yes, about the bench, she asked. About more than that, he said gently. She thought for a moment. Grandpa said people decide things every day, she said. This is just the day they say it out loud. Daniel smiled faintly. That sounds like him. Across the room, James entered quietly and took a seat near the aisle. He didn't look at Daniel right away. When he finally did, there was no accusation in his eyes, only worry. The council members filed in, faces neutral, practiced. Formalities began. Names were read, statements summarized. Safety, liability, order. When Daniel's name was called, A subtle shift moved through the room. He stood slowly. He didn't bring notes. He didn't bring data charts or projections. He brought memory. "My name is Daniel Harper," he began. His voice carried without effort. "I'm here because 15 years ago, I collapsed on a piece of concrete not far from where you're discussing today." A murmur rippled through the chamber. "I was hungry," he continued. "I was proud. And I was invisible." He paused, until one man decided not to walk past me. He didn't name the man. He didn't need to. "That place you call a liability," Daniel said, "was the reason I lived long enough to sit here now." One of the council members shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not asking you to approve a project," Daniel went on. "I'm not asking for funding or recognition. I'm asking you to consider whether removing a place of pause makes this city safer or just quieter." Silence settled. Daniel glanced briefly at Annie, then back to the council. "When you close places like that, people don't disappear," he said. "They scatter. And when they scatter, they're easier to ignore." A councilwoman cleared her throat. "Mr. Harper," she said carefully, "are you proposing an alternative use?" Daniel shook his head. "I'm proposing accountability." Another murmur. "I will take responsibility for what happens there," he said. "Not with guards, not with gates, with presence, with maintenance, with rules that make sense to the people who actually use the space." A man from the city's legal department stood. "And if someone gets hurt?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Then we respond," he said. The room grew still. Daniel finished simply. "Justice doesn't always look like enforcement," he said. "Sometimes it looks like restraint, like choosing not to erase something just because it reminds us of what we'd rather forget." He sat down. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a woman from the back stood. She wasn't on the agenda. No one had called her name. "My brother slept there," she said, her voice trembling, "until he didn't need to anymore." Another man stood. "That old guy with the cane gave me bread when I couldn't afford lunch," he said. "Didn't ask my name." One by one, people spoke. Not loudly, not angrily, just truthfully. The council recessed. In the hallway, tension pressed in again. James approached Daniel, his face tight. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "I did," James exhaled. "You're putting a target on yourself." Daniel met his gaze. "I've had targets before," he said. "This one matters." James looked at Annie, who was tracing patterns in the carpet with her shoe. "Dad would have hated this attention," he said. Daniel nodded. He would have hated the silence more. James didn't respond. He turned and walked away. When the council returned, the decision wasn't dramatic. No applause, no speeches. They voted to delay permanent closure, to authorize a community stewardship period, to review impact before final action. It wasn't a victory. It was permission to keep going. Outside, Carla let out a breath she'd been holding all morning. "They didn't shut it down," she said. Daniel nodded. "They didn't protect it either." Annie looked up. "Does that mean we still have work?" "Yes," Daniel said. "It means we've just begun." That evening, the bench was repaired again. Stronger this time, anchored deeper. People sat on it as the sun went down. Some talked, some didn't. Daniel stood back, watching. He felt tired. Not the hollow tiredness of running, but the grounded exhaustion of staying. Carla came to stand beside him. "They'll test this," she said. Daniel nodded. "I expect they will." "And you?" she asked. "How long do you plan to stay?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "As long as it takes for this place not to need me anymore." Annie slipped her hand into his. "That's a long time," she said. Daniel smiled softly. "I hope so." The stewardship period began quietly. No ribbon was cut. No announcement was made. The city posted a single notice on its website, carefully worded, "Easy to miss. Temporary community oversight. Ongoing evaluation. Subject to review." Daniel read it once and closed the laptop. "That's how they test you," Carla said, standing behind him. "They don't stop you. They watch how you fail." Daniel nodded. "Then we won't give them much to watch." The first week was harder than the hearing, not because of confrontation, but because of responsibility. People came, not in crowds, not all at once, but steadily. Someone sat on the bench every day now. Sometimes 2 people, sometimes 3. A man who waited there each morning with a coffee he never seemed to finish. A woman who rested there with grocery bags at her feet. Teenagers who stopped briefly, then moved on when they realized no one was going to chase them away. Daniel learned their rhythms without asking questions. He arrived early each morning, checked the area for trash, loose boards, anything that might turn into a reason. He fixed what he could himself. What he couldn't, he noted carefully. No shortcuts. No improvisation that might come back to hurt someone else. Annie started walking the lot with him before school. She no longer wrote everything down. Now she just looked. "Why do you check the ground every time?" she asked one morning. "Because people trip over what they don't see," Daniel replied. She nodded. "Grandpa said that too," she said. "But he meant feelings." Daniel smiled. He was right about that too. Carla noticed the changes before Daniel did. "You're tired," she said one evening, watching him wash his hands at the sink. "Yes," Daniel admitted. "But different," she said. Daniel met her eyes in the reflection of the window. "I sleep better," he said. "Even when I'm exhausted." Was not good, Devin. Carla studied him for a long moment. "My father would have trusted you by now," she said quietly. Daniel felt that settle deep. "That means more to me than you know." Midway through the second week, the rules were tested. A man arrived late one afternoon, clearly intoxicated, voice raised, movements unpredictable. People nearby stiffened. One woman gathered her things and left. Another stood, unsure. Daniel stepped forward before anyone could ask him to. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't posture. "Hey," he said calmly. "You okay?" The man glared at him. "You in charge?" Daniel shook his head. "No. Just here," the man scoffed. "That bench mine." Daniel nodded. "You can sit," he said. "But you can't scare people." The man swayed slightly. "And who says?" Daniel held his gaze. "I do," he said. "And the people who were here first." For a moment, Daniel thought it might turn, that this was the moment the city would later point to and say, "See? This is why we close places." Then the man sat down, grumbled, muttered, but stayed seated. After a while, he fell asleep. The woman who had stood watching exhaled slowly. "Thank you," she said. Daniel nodded. "We all belong here," he replied. That night, Carla didn't say anything at first. Then she said, "You didn't call the police?" "No," Daniel replied. "And you weren't afraid?" Daniel considered it. "I was aware," he said. "There's a difference." Carla nodded. "My father used to say that." The city noticed, not immediately, but enough. An inspector returned, clipboard in hand, eyes sharper this time. "You're maintaining it," he said, almost accusingly. "Yes," Daniel replied. "You're setting expectations." "Yes." The inspector hesitated. "That creates precedent." Daniel met his gaze. "So does neglect." The inspector made a note and left without another word. At school, Annie's teacher called Carla in. "She talks about the bench," the teacher said. "About community. About fairness." Carla stiffened. "Is that a problem?" "No," the teacher replied. "It's unusual. In a good way." That night, Annie asked Daniel a question she had been holding for days. "Are you my grandpa now?" she asked, quietly. Daniel didn't answer right away. He knelt in front of her. "No," he said carefully. "Your grandpa is irreplaceable." She nodded. "But you stay." Yes," Daniel said. "I stay." She thought about that, then smiled. "That's good." The pressure didn't disappear. It shifted. A reporter called. Daniel declined. A foundation offered funding. Daniel asked for time. A city official suggested formalizing leadership. Daniel insisted on shared responsibility. Each refusal was polite, each choice deliberate. One evening, James returned. He stood at the edge of the lot, watching the bench, watching Daniel speak quietly with a man he didn't recognize. "You look different," James said when Daniel approached. "So do you," Daniel replied. James glanced around. "You're really doing this?" Daniel nodded. Yes. James hesitated. I thought it would fall apart. Daniel smiled faintly. So did they. James sighed. Dad always did like impossible things. Yes, Daniel said. But he liked steady ones more. Workwells. James looked at the bench again. He would have sat there, he said. Daniel nodded. He still does. That night, Daniel sat alone on the porch after everyone else had gone to bed. He thought about the boy he had been, the man he had become, and the space between them that had finally been bridged not by success, but by return. The stewardship period wasn't over. The test wasn't finished, but something had changed. The place no longer depended on him alone. People had begun to take turns staying. The first cold rain of the season arrived without warning. Daniel noticed it early that morning. The way the air felt heavier, the way the clouds sat lower over the lot. He pulled his jacket tighter as he walked out, expecting to find the bench empty. It wasn't. A woman sat there with an umbrella resting against her knee, hands wrapped around a paper cup. Across from her, a man stood quietly, not speaking, not rushing her. They nodded at Daniel as he approached, not as an owner, not as a guard, but as someone familiar. That was new. Daniel checked the ground out of habit, then stopped himself. Someone else had already done it. The trash bin was empty. The loose board near the edge had been wedged back into place. He felt something loosen in his chest. Inside the house, Carla noticed it too. They didn't wait for you, she said, as Daniel hung up his jacket. No, Daniel replied. They didn't need to. Tenteller. Annie came into the kitchen with her backpack. Mrs. Hill said her brother sat on the bench yesterday, she said. She said it helped him think. Daniel smiled. That's what benches are for. The city's final review was scheduled for the end of the week. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. The inspectors returned, this time in pairs. They took notes, photos, asked questions they already knew the answers to. Daniel answered when asked. Other people did too. One afternoon, Daniel arrived to find a small handwritten sign taped near the bench. Please leave this place as you found it. Other people need it too. He didn't ask who put it there. That evening, James stopped by again. He didn't come inside at first. He stood near the fence, watching the rain soak into the concrete, watching the bench fill and empty as people came and went. You were right, James said finally. Daniel joined him. About what? This not being about money, James replied. Or control. Daniel nodded. It never was, James exhaled. I left because staying scared me, he admitted. Dad stayed because leaving scared him more. Daniel said nothing. He let that truth sit where it belonged. James glanced at the bench again. I don't think I could have done this. Daniel shook his head. You're doing something now. That counts. James smiled faintly. You always did have a way of making people uncomfortable in useful ways. On the morning of the final review, Annie woke early. Are they deciding today? She asked as Daniel poured coffee. Yes, he said. She thought for a moment. Do they know the rules? Daniel looked at her. What rules? She held up her notebook, now nearly full. The real ones. He smiled. I hope so. The council members arrived mid-morning. No speeches this time. No crowd. Just observation. They watched people come and go. They watched Daniel not intervene. They watched Carla talk quietly with a woman who looked exhausted. They watched a teenager help an older man steady himself onto the bench. One councilman leaned toward another. Daniel didn't hear what was said, but he saw the nod. When it was over, no one announced anything. They left. The waiting that followed felt longer than all the weeks before it combined. That night, Daniel sat alone at the table with the envelope in front of him for the first time in days. He didn't open it. He didn't need to, but he placed it where he could see it. Annie came in quietly and climbed onto the chair beside him. Are you worried? She asked. Yes, Daniel said honestly. She nodded. Grandpa said worry means you care about the right things. Daniel smiled. He was right. The call came the next afternoon. Carla answered it. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When she hung up, she didn't speak right away. Daniel waited. They approved it, she said finally. Not permanently, but long enough. Daniel closed his eyes. They're calling it a community trust, Carla continued. Shared responsibility. No single owner. Daniel exhaled slowly. That's better than ownership. They also said something else, Carla added. Daniel looked at her. They said this place worked because you didn't center yourself in it, she said. They said that was unusual. Daniel smiled faintly. So was the man who taught me how. That evening, the bench was full again. Daniel stood back, watching Annie talk with a woman he didn't know, her small hands moving as she explained something important. Carla laughed softly at something someone said. James sat for a while, then stood, then sat again. No one looked at Daniel for direction. That was how he knew. Later, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the lot, Daniel sat on the porch steps alone. He thought about the boy who had once stood here, starving and stubborn, convinced that leaving was the only way forward. He thought about the man with the cane who had quietly proven him wrong. He hadn't repaid a debt. He had continued it, and for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. The morning after the decision, Daniel woke to a sound he hadn't heard in years. Laughter. It drifted in through the open window. Light and unguarded. Children's voices. Adult voices too. Overlapping. Unhurried. The kind of sound that didn't ask permission to exist. He sat up slowly, listening, letting it settle into him. Outside, the bench was already occupied. Not by the same people as yesterday. Not by people he recognized at all. A man with a thermos sat at one end, reading the newspaper. A woman stood nearby, phone pressed to her ear, pacing in small circles as she spoke. Two teenagers leaned against the fence, arguing quietly about something that clearly mattered to them. No one looked toward the house. Daniel dressed without hurry and stepped out onto the porch. The air was crisp, clean in the way mornings sometimes were after a long storm. He leaned against the railing and watched the place breathe on its own. Carla joined him a few minutes later, coffee in hand. It feels different, she said. Yes, Daniel replied. It doesn't feel like it needs permission anymore. She nodded. My father used to say that's when places start telling the truth. Annie burst out the front door, backpack slung over one shoulder. Mrs. Hill said the bench helped her decide something big, she announced. She didn't say what, but she smiled. Daniel smiled too. That's usually enough. They walked Annie to school together, then returned to the lot. Daniel didn't check the ground this time. He didn't scan for risks or loose boards. Someone else was already doing that, an older man with a trash bag, moving slowly but with purpose. He waved when he saw Daniel. Morning, the man said. Morning, Daniel replied. That was all. Around midday, James arrived again. He didn't hesitate this time. He walked straight toward the bench and sat down, hands folded, looking out at nothing in particular. Daniel watched from a distance, resisting the urge to approach. James stayed there for a long time. When he finally stood and came over, his face looked different. Less guarded. Less certain. I kept thinking Dad would hate this, James said. All these people. All this mess. Daniel waited, but he wouldn't, James continued. He'd hate the attention, but he'd love the outcome. Daniel nodded. He believed outcomes spoke for themselves. James glanced back at the bench. I think I finally understand why you stayed. Daniel met his gaze. And James exhaled. Because leaving would have been easier. Daniel smiled faintly. Yes, James hesitated. I don't know if I can stay the way you did. You don't have to, Daniel said. You just have to choose not to disappear. James nodded slowly. I can do that. That evening, Carla brought out the wooden box. She placed it on the table between them without a word. Daniel knew what she was asking. He opened it carefully, lifting out the notebooks, the photograph, the folded letter. He held the envelope last, turning it once in his hands. I think it's time, he said. Carla watched quietly as he opened it again. The money was still there. Exactly as it had been 15 years ago. The same bills, the same careful fold. Daniel didn't touch it. Instead, he reached for the notebook beneath it, the one where his name appeared for the first time. He turned to a blank page at the back. Carla leaned in slightly. Daniel picked up a pen and began to write. Not a signature, not a statement, a continuation. He wrote about the bench, about Annie, about how the place no longer belonged to one person or one memory, about how kindness, once given, didn't end, it multiplied quietly, passed from hand to hand without announcement. When he finished, he closed the notebook and placed it back in the box. The money? Carla asked softly. Daniel shook his head. It was never meant to be spent, he said. It was meant to remind. Carla nodded. My father would agree. They placed the box back under the bed, where it belonged. As dusk settled, Daniel walked to the lot one last time that day. The bench was empty now, bathed in the soft amber of streetlights. He sat down slowly, resting his hands on his knees. For the first time, he allowed himself to speak aloud. I came back too late, he said quietly. And right on time. He imagined the old man beside him, Kane resting against the bench, eyes on the horizon. Daniel stood and took a step back, leaving the bench empty again. That was how it was meant to be. Later that night, as the house grew quiet and Annie slept soundly, Daniel sat at the table and wrote a final line on a small piece of paper. He didn't sign it. He taped it beneath the bench the next morning, where it could be found or ignored. Home is not where you end up. It's where you choose to stay. Then he stepped away, not because his work was done, but because it no longer needed him to stand in front of it. As Daniel walked back toward the house, the sun rose fully, lighting the cracked concrete, the worn bench, the people beginning to arrive again. Some would stay for minutes, some for hours. Some would leave changed without ever knowing why. Daniel Harper didn't watch them anymore. He trusted them. And somewhere, in the quiet space between memory and mourning, the debt was finally silently honored. The lesson of this story is simple but demanding. True justice is not loud, fast, or transactional. It is quiet, patient, and rooted in responsibility. Success means very little if it disconnects us from where we came from and from the people we once needed. What truly changes lives is not money or power, but the choice to stay when walking away would be easier. Kindness does not need recognition to be real, and dignity does not require permission to exist. In the end, home is not a place we own or return to for comfort. It is a commitment we honor through presence, courage, and care for others, even when no one is watching. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.